It's the actual addendum to the contract.
The addendum to our contract?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't approve anything. He spent all the money.
We're live.
Everybody's there?
And we're live.
And we're live. Sweet. Guess we can call this thing to order. 4:59. Guess
5
we're heading
o'clock.
over. What's that?
It's 5 o'clock.
All right. You want to do a quick roll call?
Alderman Atkins.
Here.
Alderman Chevalier.
Here.
Alderman Sarver.
Here.
Alderman Uladell.
Here.
Alderwoman Wilson.
Here.
And I believe Alderman Blumker is in there, but he's not on yet.
Yeah, he's here.
Okay. All present and accounted for.
All right, I guess we're turning this over to Aaron. All right. Yeah.
All right, right off the bat. Okay, well, Mayor, Board, it's a pleasure to be here today to talk to you about the progress we've had on the wastewater master plan. We're going to go through, we got about 40 slides. We're going to try and keep this to, 30 to 45 minutes, but please, if you guys have questions or comments as we go through this, please feel free to interject and talk. So I'm going to share a screen, and hopefully this, okay. Have you seen that wonderful picture? We're talking about the City of Smithville Wastewater Master Plan today. What I want to go through today is just a little bit of background of what we have done to date. And then I'm going to have my colleague Amanda Bagwell. She's going to talk a little bit about the wastewater treatment plant, its current capacity and future needs. And then we're going to go extensively into the collection system, both short-term and ultimate improvements recommended. Then we're going to talk about pump stations, and then what the recommended 10-year CIP projects are for the wastewater improvements. So a little bit of background on this. Smithville has been a thriving community for many, many years, and we want to make sure that you guys have laid out a thought out system for your 10-year development to be able to work with that. I know you've been working on a strategic master plan, and likewise, while we're laying out the 10-year plan, we also want to be thoughtful of what an ultimate collection system plan would look like. For years and years, Smithville has been kind of piecemeal as far as pump station here and a pump station there, and at the end of the day, it's ended up where you've got almost 30 pump stations around town. So the other goal is to try and come up with a plan that helps consolidate and minimize consolidate existing pump station and minimize the needs for future pump stations. So related to the pump stations, as development continues to occur, certain pump stations are at or near capacity. So it seems like anytime Jack gets inquiries about development, we've got to look at if the pump station that it's draining to can handle it, what kind of improvements are going to be necessary, and those types of things. So we want to make sure we have a clear plan for that. So as development occurs, they know exactly what's going to have to take place. And then also, likewise, a lot of these pump stations are aging and are in need of repair or replacement of certain pieces of their equipment. And then once again, long term, we would like to eliminate a lot of the smaller pump stations if we can come up with a consolidated plan to make a system gravity drain, and eliminate as many future pump stations as well. So this is I know this is probably very hard to see. This is the backbones of the existing city sewer collection and treatment system. Your wastewater treatment plant is located right in the center of town, right on the Little Platte River, so it's ideally located. And then the backbone of the collection system are two force mains. So this is the north force main, and this is, you know, historically been where the majority of the developments has occurred recently. So we wanted to take a good hard look to see what kind of capacity was remaining in that force main. Conversely, this is the south force main, and you know, as development occurs in the south, right now it's got to tie into this force main. We recently, in the last couple of years, this is the gravity interceptor that was just completed and drains to the new Effluent pump station. So by building this south interceptor, it has taken a lot of the capacity issues off of the south force main. So there is some capabilities for additional growth and additional flows to go to the south. And then, as I talked about, there's 29 pump stations sporadically all throughout the city that they either daisy chain from one to the next, but they all pretty much eventually get into either the south or the north force main. So every time development occurs, we've got to look at which pump station it's going to, and then kind of look at the domino effects downstream of it to see what kind of capacity there is available. The next part of the equation is looking at population projections. Historically, we looked at your housing building permits from the last 20 years, and that's kind of what this bar chart is showing. You can see the peaks and valleys of housing starts, you know, the housing boom in the early 2000s, followed by the housing bust in the late, 2008 through 11. You can see that housing starts really ramped up again, and then it's kind of dropped off the last 2 years. Now 2020 is a partial year, so it isn't complete yet. 2019, when I was talking to Jack, it sounded like, you know, you guys are almost out of available lots to build houses. So it is important to have capacity and have development that can feed the demand. So based on just a straight average housing starts over the last 19 years, you can see that would be about 89 houses per year. It's been higher and lower. That's the red line there. And state standards, I know there isn't a 0.7 person, but the average residents per house is 2.7. So based on that, that's 240 persons a year. That over 10 years, that would average to 2,400 people. An increase in population in Smithville. We also know you're working. You just completed your comprehensive plan with Stover and Associates, and we coordinated with them a couple of times through Jack. And based on their projections, their 10-year population growth is estimated to be between 3,500 and 4,500 new residents in the next 10 years. And then we also met with Jack and Cynthia and Chuck, and we looked at the current zoning and undeveloped land throughout Smithville. And based on just kind of Jack and everyone's ideas of what kind of interest have been raised over the recent years, what is possible or in the works to develop, what is anticipated to develop in the short term. And what we ended up doing is took all the zoning within the city and put, if it fully developed, which is, you know, a tremendous amount of acreage, it's going to take a long, long time for that to develop. But we matched the 0 to 10 growth of just about 4,500, which is what Stover and Associates indicated. So we think that's a realistic, maybe it's a little bit conservative, that you'll get 4,500 population growth in the next 10 years, but it's feasible. Obviously, the ultimate growth, that's a much bigger number. And, you know, ultimately, when would Smithville hit 50,000? You know, that could be 30, 50, 70 years. But conversely, you know, I live in Lee Summit, Missouri, and, you know, 30 years ago, it was 25,000, and now they're approaching 100,000. So it could go either way. It's hard to say, and it's especially based on current conditions in the world. And then we also looked at ultimate growth based on annexation projections. It's hard to see, but down in the southeast portion, there's this kind of gray area, and that's, you know, Jack kind of took an approach several years ago that annexation, they wanted to limit to areas that were within the watershed, which makes sense because you can serve it with wastewater collection system. So that's kind of how we ended up with those larger numbers, which, you know, ultimately you could, if everything in the city as currently zoned at typical densities, you'd be at about 78,000. So what we did, you know, and I'm going to turn it over here to Amanda, but basically we use those numbers to indicate ultimate flows that would go through pipes to size the pipes. Because, you know, if you're going to expend the time to build a pipe, whether you build a 15-inch pipe or an 18-inch pipe, the cost difference between the material of a 15 and 18 is pretty minimal. It's getting the easements, it's getting construction and digging the hole and that where the majority of the cost is. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Amanda, who's going to talk more about the treatment plant.
Yeah, thank you very much. As Aaron pointed out earlier, both the north and the south drain to the Smithville Wastewater Treatment Plant, where all the wastewater flows are treated. As Bob knows, this existing plant was converted from the original lagoon system in, I believe, 1995 to an SBR system, a sequencing batch reactor. And it was upgraded in 2007 from 2 SBRs to 3 SBRs. It also added a headworks at that time with a bar screen on it. And then in 2010, UV disinfection and effluent pumping was added. With the 2007 upgrades, there also was a sludge digester basin that was added. And then in 2019, just last year, they added a new effluent pump station that is centrally located so that it takes both the north and the south flows and pumps it through one force main to the headworks, and then an excess full holding tank to store peak flows during wet weather events. So when you're evaluating a wastewater treatment plant, you want to look at two things. One, does it have the hydraulic capacity with all of its components to treat the anticipated not wet weather flows, but the anticipated dry and wet weather flows? And does it meet the state regulated effluent limits, which we'll get into here in a little bit. As far as hydraulic capacity, we went through and we looked at what that capacity was for each of the major components of the plant. The important takeaways of this are that for the current plant, it's got an average day capacity of 1.125 MGD and a permitted peak of about 3.95 MGD. So obviously everything that you're operating now currently has the capacity that's needed. What's important is to start realizing what kind of capacity you have for future expansions. So if you were to follow your convention of adding a fourth SBR basin, your capacity would go from 1.125 to a 1.5 MGD with a peak of about a 5.25. So, what you're looking then at that point is what other facilities might need to be upgraded at that time. And you can see your UV disinfection, you've got 6, so you have more than enough capacity for another expansion at that point. So that was the first piece we looked at, what are we looking at future upgrades? The second was the permitted effluent limits. The state regulatory agency, the Missouri Department of Natural Resources, comes in and determines basically what your pollutant loading is to your receiving stream, which in this case is a Little Platte River. This is what your current permit is. It's worth noting that DNR issues these on a 5-year cycle. Your cycle just ended, and so it's currently under review with MDNR to look at your next cycle and what your permit limits are going to be. But the important thing to note here is that you've got pretty decent effluent limits for your BOD and your TSS at 45-30. Your ammonia is decent. They used to do it, and I'll get into this in a bit, but they used to do it where they did it on a seasonal range. You'd have a winter and a summer essentially, and then you have your daily max and your monthly average. But if you could go to the next slide, Aaron. What we did is we then collected all of the information from Bob and his crew, and we looked at what your performance has been for the past 3 years, because obviously you're going to have fluctuations from year to year depending on how much rain you had. Was it a dry year? Was it a wet year? And other factors like that. So we really kind of want a good range just to see what your average is over that 3-year period. So we had data from January 18th to May 2020. And looking at the first component, which was the flows, which goes back to the capacity that we were talking about earlier, we can tell from the data that you're operating at about a 0.7 MGD average flow right now. And as I said before, you're permitted for 1.125. So that gives you an indication that you still have capacity to use up in your existing infrastructure right now, and then your peak daily flow is about a 3.7, which is the less than the 4 that we anticipated. BOD and TSS, we looked at what your effluent BOD and TSS were, and this is what your current permitted limits are. It's the 45 and the 30. As you can see, Bob and his guys have been doing a great job. They've been well under the limits and not a concern. But we also wanted to look at, we keep talking about expansion, and also that you're anticipating another permit here, by the end of the year. Is kind of the anticipated date for that permit. And what can you expect? So our outlook is that with this next cycle that you are not going to see a change in your BOD and TSS limits. You're going to stick with the 45 and the 30. But if you were to do an expansion of the plant, which means that you have more flow, which means that you have more waste loads going to the stream, you are going to see an impact from that. MDNR and the EPA regulated that you can only do justified degradation of your streams, which means that you have to have a reasonable amount of pollutants that you're adding to the wastewater that don't degrade the water quality beyond what it is currently. or at that time. So what this means is that, I guess the best way to explain it is to kind of give an example. So like, let's say that you have a 1 MGD plant and your limit is a 30 milligrams per liter effluent limit. So if you were to double that plant, you would have twice the amount of flow, twice the amount of pollutants, but you want to keep the water quality the same. So going from a 1 MGD plant to a 2 MGD plant means that your effluent limit is going to be half of what it was before. So you would have a 15 milligrams per liter. And that's kind of a rule of thumb of how it works. And so if we were anticipating what your effluent limits were going to be with an expansion to, let's say, 1.5 MGD, which is adding a 4th SBR basin, we would anticipate that your future limits were going to be on that orange range of the 15 milligrams per liter weekly and a monthly of 10 milligrams per liter. And this is at the lower range, and we're hoping that when the time comes, you can actually negotiate something a little better. But what this means for you is that generally, for the most part, you guys won't have any trouble meeting those limits. There are a few outliers out there, as you can see, but through consistent operation, it shouldn't be any issues with that. So if we're looking at future expansion, there is no recommended treatment in addition to what you already have. Same thing with ammonia. Ammonia is the tricky one. I think I said earlier that they have a regional, not regional, they have seasonal averages on it. What they're doing now with the permits that they're issuing is that they actually have a monthly effluent limit. So instead of meeting, you know, you might have 2 different, one for summer and one for winter average. Now you've got one for every month of the year. And as you can see, they were fairly decent before. You might have one outlier where you had trouble meeting it under the current permit. But Bob's done a great job of hitting it. But what we're anticipating with this next permit cycle is you're definitely going to see some more stringent and tighter limits. They're proposing for your monthly average of 1.7. And Bob and his guys have done a great job of consistently being at that 1 or below. But they're definitely going to have to ratchet up some of their operations to meet that more effectively. Now, the thing to know is that MDNR calculating these proposed limits based on assumed values for like pH and alkalinity. The city is currently working with MDNR right now to try to negotiate less stringent limits based on their actual values. I know Bob's been taking some readings at the wastewater treatment plant and collecting samples, and the intent is to negotiate something a little higher than that 7.1 and that 1.7. And that's important because it goes back to that anti-degradation, which is if you go to another upgrade to the plant, increase capacity to 1.5, you're looking at pretty tight limits that are going to be difficult to meet consistently and would more than likely require some additional technology at the plant to help meet those. At this time, we're pretty positive that you'll be able to negotiate less stringent limits and that you won't need any improvements technology necessary to meet these crazy limits here, but we just wanted to make you aware of what could happen in the future. So back to talking, did we skip a slide, Aaron?
Nope.
Okay, back to talking about the future upgrades and what we found at looking at the the plant capacities and what is anticipated with future growth. We did a layout of what it would take to increase capacity of the plant to 1.5 MGD, and that is adding a fourth SBR basin. It would require some modifications at the influent valve vault and the effluent valve vault to be able to add the piping for that fourth basin, and then a fourth sludge storage, or fourth, I'm sorry, I'm on a fourth roll, in the addition of another, which would be your third sludge storage basin. And looking at the phasing of that, you know, we compared flow versus population, and we anticipate that you'll hit capacity, you'll hit that 1.125 MGD capacity in about 2027. You definitely would want to start construction on the improvements before then. And as Eric pointed out, that's based on the, you know, adding 4,500 persons in 10 years. So it's a little aggressive, and obviously, you know, you should just monitor where you're at with flows and capacities, and see if you're on schedule to hit that target or not. But the liquids improvements, I think, was about a $2.26 million, and the solids was about a 1.78. That's all right, no worries. And then for the expansion after that, we went ahead and took a look at what that is. It's just kind of important to know what kind of space you need, and Bob's probably going to hate me because I'm taking up a lot of his land application spots that he uses on the plant for these future basins. Due to operations philosophies, you know, once you get past 4 SBR basins, because of how they are filled, they're batch. So you fill one basin at a time, and then you move to the next, and then how they decant the same way, and on their cycle times. Once you get past 4 basins, it becomes complicated, and so they really recommend that you start adding 2 at a time on that way, so that you can tie basins together and operate them that way. That being the case, to go to the next expansion would be a 2.25 MGD, because you're going to add a basin 5 and a basin 6. And that's anticipated, I think, about 2038 is when you would need to go to that.
Okay, well, we're going to move to the collection system a little bit and getting the flow from the existing and new development to the treatment plant. And like I mentioned earlier, it's kind of split into the north and the south. So we're going to start by talking about the north, and I'm going to let Amanda continue to talk a little bit about it, because she's been working with Jack and Bob on the north for a long time and has a pretty good knowledge of all the development that's occurred up there.
Yeah, so this first figure just is indicating, you know, what the existing development is, and you can kind of see that, especially in the north, you've really been driven by trying to serve, you know, a subdivision at a time, and you really have a dedicated pump station almost virtually per subdivision. And they all tie into that North Force main backbone that we spoke about. So we met with the city, specifically Jack, and went through what is the anticipated development over the next 10 years, you know, which are the hot pieces here. And he identified several. And then here in the north, I think the really important ones to notate, it's already been approved. It's the Eagle Heights subdivision, which is south of Wildfire, which Aaron is indicating right there. And that one's already been platted. I think it's through the approval process. They're working on the design. That one's important because it goes back to something that Aaron mentioned previously, is that, you know, as development comes in, there's been a little bit of a struggle trying to serve it with existing infrastructure. In this case, I know the engineer worked hard with Jack to determine, you know, what's the most cost-effective solution to serve Eagle Heights. Is it taking it to one of the existing pump stations, or is it constructing a new one on their own? And I know we kind of worked with them to provide data so they could do that evaluation. And they looked at taking it south to Rollins Landing. They looked at taking it to the wildfire pump station. And one of the things that, you know, we determined that the existing pump stations obviously weren't sized to take additional development. So I believe where they've landed, and Jack might be able to back me up on that, but if you were here, but the engineer for the developer is working on resizing the wildflower pump station to be able to take the Eagle Heights flow. So what we did is, once we had worked out what's coming in the next 10 years, we applied flow projections to the development, and we ran it in our model for our existing condition model. You know, we wanted to see, can the existing infrastructure support the anticipated growth? And the answer is, unfortunately, it cannot. As you can see, there's some segments here that are highlighted red. That indicates that those segments are over capacity. The blue are ones that are approaching capacity. And honestly, that's tends to be what we expected. So then we went back through, because we know that it's important to encourage development and keep encouraging that growth. And we wanted to know, like, what's that tipping point? How much development can the existing infrastructure serve before we're forced into doing improvements? And so what we did is we highlighted areas that we knew were coming, which was the Eagle Heights that I just talked about. You know, we know that there are pump station improvements that are necessary, but can the existing force main and the piping system handle the additional growth? And what we found is that it could take the 230 houses that are platted and an additional 90 houses from that development area could be served in that area with the North Force Main. And then we also looked at how much additional houses from some of the other growth areas could it take, and we found it could take additional 265 houses, so roughly, you know, 585 single-family houses could grow, you know, in that time period, which equates to about 1,600 persons can be served before you are limited by the capacity of the existing infrastructure. So obviously this is developer driven. It depends on how fast developers can get things going, and when how fast they're selling lots and people are building. So it's kind of hard to put a timeline on it. But, you know, you really should start thinking about planning in the next 2 to 3 years for that infrastructure to serve the rest of that growth that we have anticipated in the north.
Yeah, so if you go back to what I was saying earlier about the average house starts was 89 houses, that equates to about 260 people per year. So if all the development occurred in the north, you'd reach capacity in just under 7 years. Now, we know it's not all occurring in the north. There's some in the north and some in the south. So that stretches that out a little bit. But it's time to start thinking about it because as Chuck and Cynthia know, as you're laying out interceptor sewers, it takes a while to get that designed and also to get the required easements to get it constructed.
So, Aaron, this is Melissa. I have a question.
Sure.
If I'm understanding what you're saying right, we have that little bit of capacity in the north system as a whole, but the current lift stations, most of them probably really can't handle any more themselves. Is that correct? Am I thinking correctly with what you're sharing?
Yes, you're correct. So what this is saying is the existing force main, that trunk line, the north force main can handle the flow for this much additional development. Now, the one with the asterisk, the 320, that requires improvements to the Wildflower pump station, and that's already part of the development agreement with that development. The developer's paying for those upgrades. So the cost for the upgrades to the Wildflower pump station are not considered in the city CIP budget. Okay.
Thank you.
Any other questions on this before we move on?
Hi, so this goes back to, we said that you can't serve all of the 10-year anticipated flow. So improvements are necessary. Now, some of them kind of go back to what Aaron was talking about, that they come from the developer. The developer funds them, and that includes up at the north. You can hardly see the one, but there's a new pump station up there, and there's another one kind of hidden behind the label there. But unfortunately, where those subdivisions are, they're on the other side of the watershed, so they can't drain by gravity to the North Force main or future improvements there. So they're going to have to be pumped, and then more than likely it'll probably be developer funded on that piece. But the big improvement and is honestly, I think that the city has had in their minds since 2004, and that's eventually installing the Owens Branch Phase 1 gravity line. It's basically going to, and forgive me, I think the names have changed a little bit over time, but I always called it the Harborview Force Main. It serves the Harborview subdivision in Grayhawk, but it's sized to be a 30-inch interceptor that runs from the plant all the way to that Harborview connection point. And what this does is I mean, honestly, it frees up capacity, but more than that, it reduces the pressure in the overall force main, so that your pumps are operating more efficiently, and it increases the amount of flow that they can pump. So it improves your system overall. And that has a pretty hefty price of about $6.5 million on it. And then, oh, sorry, I missed one piece, Aaron. Can you go back real quick? And this also goes towards what we were talking about earlier. You want to reduce the number of overall pump stations, and having that gravity line, you'll be able to serve Cub Cadet without a pump station in the future.
And that also related opens up, the old Price Trapper site, if they want to tie onto this sewer and some of these other areas along 169, if those, want to have a more intense use, they'd be able to be served by that interceptor as well.
So then we looked at what the additional development plan looks like to go to ultimate. And again, we worked with city staff to identify some of the pieces that might never really go, which is that area up. It's in a separate watershed, but to the north. I used to call it JC Ranch. I don't know what it's referred to these days, but that one likely won't go. And then several of the 1 acre lots that somebody's developed probably won't go. But we then looked at what infrastructure would be needed to serve long term in the future. And again, our goal was to try to reduce the number of pump stations, to go to gravity where we can, and be able to serve all of the outlying areas of the city. And so we've identified, we talked previously in the 10-year about the Owens Branch Phase 1. Phase 2 would take it basically up to the Rollins Landing connection point, and that would allow you to take off, I guess, or up past Wildflower. That would allow you to again increase the system performance by reducing the head in it, because you're pulling off all of the Harborview and the Greyhawks and the Rollins Landing and Rock Creek are all coming off of that main force main. And then in the future, based on development and when it occurs, they've got the Phase 3 and then the tributary branches.
So are you ready for the reveal?
Yeah. So Phase 2 and 3. 3 is obviously smaller and it's at the top of the watershed, so it only needs to be an 8-inch pipe. So that one's, less than $1 million. And then for a total price of about $6.62 million for all of those.
And so just to reiterate, these are ultimate improvements. So these aren't things we're considering in the current 10-year CIP plan, but it's just kind of lays them out. So something to consider if there's a parcel of ground that's developing, Jack and the Public Works Department, they need to, reserve right of way or easements for those sewers in the future, whether they're building them or not. We just want to make sure they're well planned out for as things start to develop in that area. So I know we're getting up against the end. The south is a lot easier. With that recent interceptor sewer project we just built the last year, it's relieved a lot of the pressure on development in the south. Again, this is that south force main here, and then that's the new gravity interceptor that's relieved a lot of the pressure on that sewer. When we talked with Jack on this, these were the hot areas that he anticipates development's going to occur. Some of these obviously are currently going, obviously this marketplace and that is under construction now. Some of this over here off commercials under construction. So those are going now. And then there's some other areas a little further down south, industrial and commercial areas that are going to develop too. So what does that look like to impact on the existing system? So again, we ran the model with the anticipated full build out of those developments, and really it looks pretty good. You can see this area here has turned blue, so it's approaching capacity issues. These couple areas up here by Cedar Lakes are kind of an anomaly, because what it's telling us is there's some high velocities, but those we verified those capacities are adequate for that, and we're not going to anticipate development on those pump stations in the next 10 years. But what the short-term plans for construction are currently, I'm sure you're all aware, is the Rocky Branch sewer, or the South Interceptor, is currently in easement acquisition, and that's going to take the flow from the far south subdivision. Is that Forest Glen, is that right?
Forest Oaks.
Forest Oaks, and then also it'll divert that flow off of the Rocky Branch, which is a KC Mo treatment plant, and then open this all up for development. This new South Booster pump station is going to take place of Hills of Shannon, and then it's going to pump it over here into that trunk in force main. And then the other short-term infrastructure plan we have is to do a gravity line along 169 that will take McDonald's, Diversified Metal, Platte Valley Bank, and then drain it all the way down to Hills of Shannon and to the South Booster pump station, which basically it's going to make a U-turn and go back up the hill. But it gets rid of 3-4 pump stations. And some of this is also driven by development as some of these parcels pop. Jack's been in negotiations with multiple people that have looked at it, that they're going to have to contribute to the cost of those improvements if they want to be served. As far as other ultimate, okay. So for the 10-year recommended improvement plans on the south, that's pretty much it. The stuff that's currently in the hopper are the projects planned for the next 10 years. So that's good news that you've already planned for all that, and those are all designed and ready to get built. Now, when you get to the ultimate development in the south, it gets a little bit crazy because there's a lot of empty space in the south. And in addition to what's already in the city limits, we looked at some areas that are currently outside the city limits that Jack and city staff have discussed about being in a potential annexation plan. So we wanted to account for those areas that are within the watershed. That includes this pink area over here and some of this area on this side on the west side of town too. So the ultimate plan for the south would be to run an interceptor sewer all the way along Little Platte River through downtown, and then it would curve around and go along Wilkerson Creek and go all the way up here. So that's a lot of pipe. It's going to take a lot of years to get that built. And then ultimately there's a bunch of tributaries that would pick this Wilkerson Creek Phase 4 would pick up any future annexation. If this pops with, subdivisions and a location near the interstate, this would allow Strawberry Hill Pump Station to go away. And then this would ultimately tie into where this existing sewer is, and it would eliminate that South Booster Pump Station. So this is just getting built. So you can imagine this is probably 20, 25 years out, unless some serious development starts to occur in the south. This is where the price tags start to get pretty steep. So you can see that whole Wilkerson Creek sewer all the way up to the South Booster Pump Station is $14 million in 2020 dollars. Some of those tributaries are 1.5, and then I guess I didn't talk about it, but there's also an interceptor over here that ties into what was already built that picks up all the development. Picks up all the development on the other side of the ridge. Basically 169 is a ridge, and this area over here to get fed by gravity would have to also have an interceptor sewer. So, and that cost is about $5.5 million. Sum total of the South Ultimate is over $21 million. So we're running low on time, Amanda, so can you quickly go through the pump stations?
Yeah, so we did a condition assessment. We worked with staff. We visited the pump station sites, and basically we looked at what it would take out there to basically bring them up to snuff. And there's a few categories that really came to light. You've got controls if you need to upgrade your control panels at the pump station, fencing if there's no adequate fencing or if the fencing's falling down, and then specifically the access road. And that one's important because it never fails that the plants, the pump stations always fail right in the middle of a storm. So the access is pretty critical. And so what we did is we just went through, and based on what we saw, we put a dollar value on what it would take to upgrade each lift station to meet the city's current standards. And with the few exceptions, you know, you can see them notated, like Wildflower. We talked about how that one's, the developer's going to be replacing that one. Smith's Fork, we have a separate cost for that one. That one's located in the floodplain and probably needs to be relocated. And we notated it if it's going to be decommissioned in the 10-year plan or with the, you know, phase 2 improvements. So for the north, you're looking at 160,000, and in the south, again, obviously we didn't put a dollar value to it. If it's one that we either feel that there was no rehab needed, or if it was being phased out in a future development plan. But that's kind of the laundry list of everything, and it's about 190,000.
So to sum up everything, this is the sum of the anticipated 10-year capital improvements plan, and we kind of have a range in dates here. Again, I want to caveat that a lot of this is debate based on growth and development. Rocky Branch Interceptor and South Booster Pump Station, that's a firm price, and that's going to happen here in the next year. The other project we talked about, we had 500,000. There's some other costs that may be associated with that I think is going to be more developer driven. We talked about the pump station improvements just a moment ago, and that sum total is 346,000. We have that kind of spread out over, you know, you don't have to do that all at once. You can spread that out and kind of, you know, I would look to Bob to, you know, prioritize which ones need to go. You could fund that over multiple years. The Smith's Fork pump station, that was one Amanda talked about too, that is located, it's down, I used to call it the campground pump station. It's on the Smithville Lake property where the campground is. And that one, we're doing the raw water pump station on the drinking water side right now, getting it out of the floodplain because it's flooded multiple times. But the wastewater pump station's located in the same vicinity, and it floods as well. So it really needs to get moved up to higher ground, and that's what that 625,000 is. Again, the Owens Branch, that's the developer-driven one that needs to start to get planned for. That's the real big ticket item that's in the 10-year plan. And then the 2 treatment plant improvement projects, both the liquids and solids. Sum total, that's north of 14 million. And I don't want to alarm you too much, the 2027, you know, I think some of these realistically might be able to drag out 3 or 4 more years. I think our growth projections, like I said, are conservative. I think it'll be interesting after the 2020 census is finalized to see where you guys actually sit. And then those numbers can be tweaked as necessary. The good thing is we built a new model of the entire force main system within town, so we can play with different scenarios to see what, when Jack calls and says, hey, somebody wants to build here, we can look at, see what the effect is and see what projects need to be moved up or can slide a little bit further. So I know that's a lot to kind of absorb, and Linda, I will email you this presentation so you can distribute it and put it on your website if you want. With that, we'll open up to any questions or comments or anything else you guys want to talk about.
Hey, Aaron, is there any
savings by doing the Smiths Fork work together if we did a design build on the pump station?
On
While we're out there tearing everything up for the raw water pump station.
oh, to try and get that, the Smith Forks in there?
Yeah.
That's something to consider. Yeah, I mean, we could look at that, and you know, it may be something we could even look at change ordering in. We could see who the contractor is going to be on that, and if we got a good contractor to work with, they may be itching to get a little bit more work.
Yeah, because that's in this budget coming up, right?
The raw water pump station, yes, we're getting ready to advertise that here this winter and build it all 2021.
Could we do it as an amendment to see what it would cost? Rough numbers. If we already got equipment mobilized and we're tearing stuff up,
we can definitely look at that. Yeah, I can work with Chuck, and we can. Obviously, that one we have to work with the Corps on that, and they're obviously mentally prepared to do the raw water pump station because it has a definite benefit to them. Obviously, but it is serving the Corps and the campground, so that's a good idea.
yeah. I mean, we're also looking at campground improvements, parks master plan, all this other overlay stuff. I don't want to go build and tear up 2 years, 3 years later. I mean,
Okay. That's a great idea. I think I can get with Bob and Chuck, and we can put a game plan together, see what that would take.
anyone else have any questions on this one?
I might use that as a little bit of a segue into thinking about the budget. We obviously can have some discussion with regard to the wastewater master plan, but one of the things we want to be aware of is cash flow. That would be the only thing that we need to look at there. And that's what I had noted in my cover memo on our 2021 recommended budget, that really our red flag area right now is making sure we understand where our combined water and wastewater fund is. So,
Mayor, make a comment real quick. Am I coming in all right?
Mhm.
Yeah. Okay. This is a great plan to get started with. One thing we don't want to forget is this is the main parts of the collection system and the treatment system. We have hundreds of miles of smaller mains, and that we're also responsible for, and maintenance isn't part of this at this point. So, you know, the prices that we have are for capital improvements, but there's a lot of work we need to do on our smaller collection system.
Chuck likes to spend money
I
to
do.
take care of the system.
I just want to make sure people understand that.
Yep. Nope. It's
There's a lot more
appreciated.
costs. So.
That's a good point, Chuck. Yeah, you know, that was kind of beyond the scope of this initial wastewater master plan, but you know, a condition assessment of the existing system. Like I said, there's miles and miles of pipe that are aging. Luckily, I mean, knock on wood, hopefully most of the newer subdivisions are in pretty good shape, but you know, Bob has started to allocate money for a sewer rehab. I think he's got a couple $100,000 a year for doing sewer linings. That's going to help. But I don't think anyone, I mean, it's out of sight, out of mind of what those conditions of those pipes are.
You know, and the slip lining program will help with some of that capacity issue if we can keep some of the infiltration out. It's going to be very slow going, but it may help a little bit.
All right, anything else? We're ready to move on to the 9-month budget update.
I appreciate all you guys' time. I know it's not the most stimulating subject, but I appreciate you hanging in there with us. And, you know, we've always, Amanda and I both have enjoyed working with the staff and with all of you this whole time. So with that, I'll sign off unless you need anything else from us.
Just a giant map to put on the wall.
Yeah.
Thank you, Aaron.
Or
All
other
right.
map.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Okay, can everybody see my screen? Okay,
Yep.
we will run through the fiscal year 20 budget update. We are 9 months into the budget year, and all the data that I will talk about is as of July 31st, so a couple weeks ago. The general fund, our revenue, we're at about 78% of our budget for the year, which is great. And expenditure-wise, we're at about 68% of budgeted expenditures. This 5.4 million budget number breaks down as 885,000 for those one-time CIP expenses and $4.5 million for operational expenses. If you look at these year-to-date expenses, about 513,000 or so falls into these one-time expense categories. So about 58% of that budget has been spent already. And the remaining of that, about 3.2 million falls on the operations side. So we're about 70% of our operational expenditures spent year to date. We'll look at a couple of our revenues here. So property taxes first. We are already about $20,000, which is about 2.5% over budget. And if you look at how that kind of compares to 18 and 19, we should be at about 99.5% of what we expect for the full year right now. So if we apply that logic, we still would expect to receive about $4,000 more here in these last couple months of the budget year. And that's no surprise because most of this revenue comes to us in January every year. So we've already exceeded our budget, and we expect to receive a little bit more over these next couple months. Sales tax revenue, when we look at this historically, there is typically a jump in these summer months. So 268, 245, 271 back in 18, 254, 251, 280. And we see a similar jump here, 279, 276, 313. This is also relative to, we've kind of had this conversation about how we think COVID-19 might be having actually a positive effect on our sales tax revenue. So this is reflected here as well. So we've collected to date about 870,000, which is 80% of what we budgeted. And our projection right now is that we'll be about $80,000 over budget, about $1.16 million. And I did include a sales and use tax report with the regular packet. It has some month by month detail in there if you have a chance to look at that sometime. Use tax revenue, little bit of an interesting story here because at the beginning of this fiscal year, when we had the 3-month update for sure, we were actually looking at our use tax coming in under what we had budgeted. And that has completely turned around in this third quarter. You'll see that $133,000 use tax revenue number. We are at 84% of our budget, and at this point, we think that's still going to keep increasing. So we are looking at ending up about $24,000 over our budget with a total collection of around $367,000. And in these last 2 slides, the sales tax and the use tax, keep in mind these numbers are through July 31st, and we received a distribution from the county or the state on August 7th, and those numbers are included in the report that's in the big packet for the regular board meeting. And the general fund sales tax and the general use tax combined were about $65,000 more than the projected numbers we had in to receive in August. So when we get to the fiscal year 21 budget, we'll talk about where that might play into those numbers a little bit, but those August numbers came in higher than what we anticipated as well.
And Dan, if I can just clarify and make sure that the board does understand that. So that $65,000 more than budget is for that 1 month. So those numbers for basically the May, June, and a little bit of July sales tax were very good and will help us in our general fund balance going forward.
Correct. In the capital projects fund, this is the remaining money that's left from the GEO bonds. We expect to have a little bit of revenue in this fund from reimbursement from the Recreation Trails Program grant that's related to the Main Street Trail project. That project has been awarded, but construction has not started yet. So we don't have any revenue year-to-date wise. On the expenditure side, we've spent about 25%, this $459,000. All of that's relative to the South Commercial Sidewalks project and just a little bit of engineering cost to the Main Street Trail and downtown streetscape. In the Transportation Sales Tax Fund, budgeted revenue or actual revenue, we're at about 84% of what our budget was, and we project to exceed that budget revenue number. Expense-wise, there are $380,000 budgeted. 200,000 of that is earmarked for the streetscape. The other 120,000 for operations and 60,000 for engineering fees for the Greyhawk Roundabout. We anticipate bringing the Greyhawk Roundabout recommendation to the board in September. And as you know, downtown streetscape hasn't started yet. So this 121,000 is all operational expenses at this point. So about 32% of our budget year, or our budgeted amount. In the capital improvement sales tax fund, this is also a half-cent sales tax, so that same budgeted revenue number, and we're at about 84% here as well. On the expense side, there's a transfer to the debt service fund and also some money for the Downtown Streetscape East project. This transfer to the debt service fund is for the fiscal year 20 debt payments and also to fund a reserve in the debt service fund. So we'll talk about that fund here real quick. Here's that same budgeted revenue from the capital improvement sales tax fund. This 223 that we've received so far is what we've transferred in to cover those first debt payments in March. So here's our budgeted expenditures, 325,000. This is the outgoing debt payments that we paid in March, and the other debt payments are due September 1st, and we actually just paid those earlier this month. So those will be reflected next time, as well as the transfer to fund the reserve in this fund. In the combined water and wastewater systems fund, revenue-wise, we're about 72% of our budget. That budgeted revenue is really sales and penalties, impact fees, and then connection, stormwater, and lease revenue fees. On the budget side, about 6.7 million of expenditures is what our budget was. That breaks out at about 3.2 million for one-time expenses and about 3.5 million operationally. We're at about 60% or 58% year to date. We know that the wastewater master plan is underway. The raw water pump station is being engineered and it's close. The Main Street water line is under construction. And then the 144th Street pump station project, I believe that's in engineering as well, getting pretty close to going to bid. And then the Hawthorne sewer project is under construction as well. That one might even be finished. Check. When we look specifically at water and wastewater sales revenue, budget-wise, we budgeted just under 3.5 million, and year-to-date, we're at about 80% of that. When we look at where we were these last 2 years, at 7/31, we were really at closer to about 70% of what we had ended up collecting for the year. So if we apply this 70% to our current revenue, that actually implies a projection of basically approaching that $4 million mark, which would be about 467,000 over what we budgeted. Some of this year-to-date revenue that we've collected is relative to people working from home. It's not something we usually have in this community, so that's helped out this fund as well. We don't anticipate that to maybe stay exactly as high as that's been in future months, but for right now, it has helped us out quite a bit. In the sanitation fund, budgeted revenue, we're about 74% of that collected to date. And on the expenditure side, about 73%. This is a fund that funds our trash and recycling and our household hazardous waste. And we always want this fund to break even, and it's doing that. So that fund looks great. And then just a quick update on the stimulus CARES fund. Here's our budgeted revenue of the $945,000 from the county, which we've received. On the expenditure side, we've spent about $130,000, about 14% year to date. So I know I went through that really, really quickly. Are there any questions that the board has about any of our current position in the current budget year? Okay, I am going to move over to the fiscal year 21.
Dan, if I could jump in for 1 sec, just to kind of set a little bit of context and go over a few items quickly before you jump into the detail of the 2021 recommended budget. I believe that the information presented to the board is reflective of the goals and priorities set by the governing body at our retreats over the last couple of years. We are very fortunate, given the current global situation and the national economy with regard to COVID-19. A number of communities in the metropolitan area have looked at scaling back. Dan provided in the update on the 2020, we've not been impacted by sales tax loss like some areas have. We have really had minimal impact in the negative with regard to COVID-19 to this point. Operationally, the budget is balanced, and the same or very similar current service levels to those provided currently are included in the budget. We do request direction from the board on a number of items, and Dan has done a good job in outlining that information there. As noted at the end of Aaron's presentation and in my memo, in the coming months, one of the priorities on staff will be working with our financial advisors, working with those who reviewed our rate study earlier for water and wastewater costs, and really trying to focus on the health and improvement of the combined water and wastewater master plan, combined water and wastewater funds, in addressing those infrastructure needs for the community. I do quickly want to take an opportunity. This is Dan's last meeting as a City of Smithville employee, and next Monday is his last day with us, and want to thank him for his efforts as finance director over the last 4 years, and my time with him, slightly over 2 years, and the time and effort he's put into providing you all very sound financial information and a strong budget. With that, I will turn it over to Dan now.
Thank you, Cynthia. Okay, so this is our first walkthrough of the fiscal year 21 budget, and I do want to outline that the timeline allows for a second discussion in September. Could be on the 1st, could be on the 15th. The 15th probably makes a little bit more sense to discuss some more items if there are questions, if there are some different things we want to look at. The timeline for approval of the budget would be first reading on October 6th and the second reading on October 20th. So we have a little bit of time to talk through these items to make any potential changes that the board sees fit. So I'll slow down a little bit. I'll do this slower than I did the 9-month budget update, and we'll have some good conversation there. So in the general fund, I've displayed here our operating revenue versus our operating expenditures for true fiscal year 19 dollars, projected dollars for fiscal year 20, and then what is in the recommended budget for fiscal year 21. So operationally, in fiscal year 19, our revenue exceeded our expenditures by about 238,000. Projected wise in fiscal year 20, we're looking at about 126,000. And then the recommended budget for next year, revenues exceeding expenditures by about 8,000. So in the fiscal year 20 9-month budget update, I talked about the general fund sales tax and the use tax, specifically that we received in August, being more than what we thought we were going to receive in August. That if that continues to kind of hold true for the rest of the year, this $4.5 million of in revenue is going to increase. So 4.6 million, maybe a little bit higher than that, depending on what those numbers come in. And when we start talking about in these next couple slides, we'll get to cash balance. If this 4.5 million increases, then that cash balance would also increase by the same amount. So operationally, some budget highlights on the revenue side. We are projecting a fiscal year 21 revenue budget of just under $4.6 million. And that includes recommendations from staff in the form of a 2.25% increase in sales tax revenue, which that relates to about $27,000 of more dollars in fiscal year 21 than what we are projecting in 20. And that further breaks down as a 1.25% increase on existing sales figures, and then a projected 1% in new sales tax revenue from the marketplace. Then we are looking at a 7.5% increase in use tax revenue, which is another $27,000. And use tax revenue trend-wise has been much more than 7.5% year over year. However, with fiscal year 20, those numbers are jumping up so high lately with deliveries going to people's homes that we wanted to temper that by reducing or projecting a little bit of a smaller increase through to fiscal year 21. Then we're looking at only a 90% property tax collection, which would bring about $5,000 less than what we're anticipating right now. So just kind of for reference, we're in the high 90s in terms of property tax collection rates. We've been, excuse me, we've been over 95% in each of the last 3 years. But prior to that, we were under 95%. And we feel like we want to be conservative with that number, as COVID might have had an impact on people's employment and those property taxes being due in December. We just want to be a little bit careful with what we anticipate to receive for fiscal year 21. Then we also included a decrease in telecommunications franchise tax revenue, about $20,000. That is the franchise tax fee that we charge to people's landlines, home phone numbers. As we know, those people continue to get rid of those lines in lieu of cell phones, and we've seen a pretty steady decrease in that over the last few years. This also projects a 70% decrease in what we anticipate to receive in interest, which is about a $68,000 impact. Our interest rates all over the world have dropped lately, so we do anticipate that we're taking the same hit that everybody else is. We're looking at a 33% decrease in building permit revenue, which is about $24,000 or so less than what we anticipate receiving in fiscal year 20. But then we are right now anticipating a return to normal for what we expect to receive in reimbursement for the school resource officers, court fines getting back to that normal, recreation programs getting back on track, and then the campground opening for a full season again next year. There are a couple concerns, probably isn't a super great word, but we know that schools are looking at some different things, and are we going to be receiving the full reimbursement, the complete return to normal? in that SRO reimbursement. Maybe that's yet to be seen a little bit, but at this point, we're anticipating that in the budget. So those 7 or so bullet points right there add up to about $28,000 in change from fiscal year 20 to fiscal year 21. And every other revenue line item that we have, from business licenses to credit card fee revenue to peddlers permits, all of those items add up to another about $40,000. On the expenditure side, we're looking at about $4.9 million in our recommended operating budget. So staff's recommendations here, we've talked about the employee compensation plan back in on July 17th, I believe that was presented. So we're looking at no cost of living adjustment, but we are recommending the inclusion of a 3% merit pool, which would be for salary increases that effective in May of 21. That has about a $42,000 impact to the general fund. When we presented that same day the employee handbook, we included some conversation on the addition of on-call time compensation. In the general fund, that would be some part-time or some hours for primarily the streets department. So that has an impact of about $6,500. Right now, we are including a 15% increase in our medical insurance premiums. Over the general fund, that has about a $72,000 impact. We are looking to get our final renewal numbers here in early September, so we can see what those are and really drill down on what that impact is when we receive those numbers. And then the reclassification of one position in the development department has about a $4,800 effect. So those items that we talk about up there include a total about $125,000, and then every other line item in the general fund operating budget has a change of about total of about $54,000. So you take that projected operating revenue, subtract off the staff's recommended operating expenditures, and we're looking about an $8,000 revenue over expenditure figure. So that means that we have a balanced operating budget in the general fund. Now, in order to be where we're at with this, there are some items that we discussed that staff ultimately decided not to include in the fiscal year 21 operating budget. So when we get to this next slide, we're going to open it up a little bit for some conversation with the board. If any of these items are really stressed as being important, we will surely look to include them in the recommended budget. What we would also like some guidance on, we only have $8,000 available as it sits right now. Do we, the direction would be nice if we were told we want to keep this balanced budget, so anything that gets added, we need to look elsewhere to try to trim a little bit to stay balanced, or do we want to include some of these items and understand that we won't have a balanced budget? And really, before I get into this next slide, there's one other piece of information here. We actually received yesterday that Platte County Dispatch, that fee is increasing. The Platte County passed a public safety sales tax, and part of that is going to salaries, and our dispatching fee is based on the average salary of dispatchers. So in the current budget, in this $4,589,000, we have about $56,000 budgeted for dispatching services. And based on the information that we received yesterday, it looks like that number might be closer to about $70,000. So we are already looking at about $14,000 that we're going to have to work into our budget. Staff's goal at this time with that is to find ways to absorb that in that $4.5 million. We also know that there is going to be some discussion at the September 1st work session regarding the police department. So there also might be some opportunities there, depending on what that conversation goes like. We might be looking at making some changes in the police department budget based on that conversation. So we'll definitely look at what all those changes could potentially look like after that conversation. But in the meantime, these are the items that staff chose not to include at this time. So an additional $12,500 for some economic development programs. We chose not to include moving from the gold level to the platinum level for the Clay County EDC sponsorship. Right now we participate at the gold level for $2,500. We could participate at the platinum level for $4,000, so it'd be about a $1,500 change if we decided to add that. These last at least 2 years, we've participated in the Communities for All Ages program for $1,500 a year. We've removed that from the fiscal year 21 budget. We had some discussion about police department radios. They have 24 of them. They are all 8 years old or older, and we anticipate replacement cost is about $5,000 each. We had some internal conversations about getting those on a 6-year replacement cycle, which would be 4 per year, so about $20,000 for that. We had a community survey performed in January of 2018, and we have several of our department benchmarks that are based on responses in that survey. So we would like to do another one, but ultimately did not include that in the recommended budget, and that has a cost of about $14,000. These past couple years also, there is an ordinance that allows $7,250 in expenditures for the board on training and a community relations allowance. In the past, the board has elected to or chose to forego the community relations allowance and only fund the training at 50%. So we've kept that this year. If the board feels like they want us to change that, then you are welcome to let us know. That has about, if we included all that back in, about $4,600. And then we've had conversations about whether or not we would like to commit some money to jumpstarting the Parks and Recreation Master Plan. So right now, the capital improvement plan has expenditures for a Parks and Recreation Master Plan in 21, but we know that we're not going to see any or very little parks and stormwater sales tax revenue we're not going to see it until January. So if we wanted to get going on that a little bit early so that potentially the plan could be done come springtime, we would need to fund the beginning of that plan out of general fund dollars. So all of those items add up to just under $80,000. So I'd like to open it up for a little bit of discussion by the board and see what your thoughts are on any of those items.
I got a question. On these items not funded in the budget, to jumpstart the Parks and Rec Master Plan, would it be possible to do an amendment to this year's budget due to the way the tax dollars or the revenues flowing in better than we thought? Is it possible to look at that for this year?
Yes, we absolutely could. I mentioned that $65,000 earlier that we've exceeded those projections for August in those two categories, sales tax and use tax. Instead of that $65,000 being added to the cash balance for next year, we could take some of that and dedicate it to the Parks and Master Plan now. I'm just going to throw some numbers out there. If we wanted to take half of it, we can spend $32,000 on a park, the beginning of a Parks and Rec master plan now, and our cash balance would still increase by the other $32,000.
Sounds good.
Can we do the same with the radios?
Yes, we can.
That'll be your two biggest hits.
Did you say the average radio is 8 years right now?
Yes, and Chief can give a little, did I have that right, Chief?
Yeah, you've got that right, Dan.
How long can you expect those to last?
Generally, we look to start replacing them no later than about 10 years. We have received some word from Motorola through Platte County that the current models we're carrying, and all of these were purchased at one time, so they're all lifed at on the same schedule right now. This is probably the last year they're manufacturing parts for them. So then if there's any repairs, we'll be looking at trying to get parts off a shelf from a store somewhere or a repair shop, which typically carries some parts like that. But eventually 1, 2, 3 more years down the road, we're going to run into difficulties getting parts to make repairs. And we'd like to start replacing a handful of them at a time to stagger their life expectancy and to not have them all age at the same time.
Well, it sounds like you might have 4 to use for spares, parts or whatever. Or do we want to look at trying to do 2 in this year's budget?
I would be okay with, starting this year to go ahead and start replacing them then.
Do we want to do the full 20,000 or do you want to look at doing 10?
I'd be okay with the 20,000. If you're going to only do 4 now, you're still going to be behind in replacing them in the long run.
So put 20,000 in next year's budget and try to do 20,000 in this year's budget?
I think that'd be a good idea.
Yeah, I think that would work.
So to follow up on that, what I heard was potentially do an amendment to the fiscal year 20 budget to include 20,000 to do 4 radios now, to include 25,000 to start the Parks and Recreation Master Plan now, and then include 20,000 in the fiscal year 21 budget to do the next set of 4 radios. Is that correct?
Yeah, we'll find some other line items in the other budgets to.
So then back to here then, are we comfortable if this flips instead of 8,000 to the good, it'd be 12,000 with expenditures over revenues, or would you want to direct us to try to find 12,000 here and there to bring this back to a balanced budget?
I'd say give us 20,000 here and there to look at and show us what the number looks like on property tax being at the level it's at this year, just as a hypothetical.
Okay.
Yeah, I would personally like to still see a balanced budget.
Absolutely.
Okay, we could do that.
And I know I asked you to go pretty conservative, and I think others apparently agreed with us taking the property tax down to 90%. So I think that's a very conservative number that you're currently reflecting there.
I agree. Okay. Is there any discussion on any of these other items?
No, I don't see the board traveling anywhere in the next year. I think the economic development number looks okay. I mean,
As it is,
yeah.
not adding any of the new.
Yeah, I don't know that we need it. I think that we would want to look at maybe the Visit KC partnership. Have we been able to leverage much off of? I mean, we've been in it for a year, right?
Well, we've been in it a year, and a significant portion of that has been some kind of COVID restrictions. So I'm not sure, and I don't know if Nikki, Nikki, get any information from them on our participation?
Yeah. Can you hear me? Okay, sorry, I'm eating dinner, so got the video off. Honestly, we started that kind of right before it was late fall, and then it was winter, and then it was COVID. So I haven't played around with the reports as much as I think there's more reporting and information available than I have accessed. I can tell you that I've added quite a few events, like even for, the Main Street group, and a couple of the networking events. We've had a few members of EDC attend. And on top of that, they cut our fee in half this year because of COVID. So I think that's been a great partnership, and I think they're going to find a way to kind of make it up for us for this year. It's good bang for your buck.
Okay. Yeah. I think we could try to figure out a way to put Visit KC, and the rest of them I don't know about. But the, you brought up Main Street. We really need to get that group focused because that's a lot of money.
And we do have the partnership with Main Street funded in the fiscal year 21 budget.
So when do we need to start looking at some type of director for that position as well too? Is that like their 3 or 5 year timeline?
We did not have to commit to a certain year, and because of COVID, they've already basically extended all of our timelines about a year anyways. We have a board meeting with them on Monday, so I think we can ask a lot of these questions. But my understanding from the original agreement was basically we can bring on a director whenever it makes sense to the city and to Main Street.
Yeah, and I just don't want this turning into another community for all ages or what was the other one we were doing, 2025? Baldridge stuff or anything that we funded that people have kind of lost focus on. People need to start stepping up on Main Street.
Well, and I think that we have a good core group of folks involved in the Main Street piece. There is a significant linkage from it to the strategic plan and the comp plan update. So I hope that we can take some momentum from Monday and move into really kind of pushing that forward.
Sounds good. I think we should ask them if they think we should keep the Visit KC participation.
Okay.
Put that on the agenda for the Main Street group. I don't want to have Visit KC pushing stuff and having people come here and getting visibility to our downtown for people to be upset when people are in our downtown. Next slide, please, Dan.
Okay, yeah, thank you for the direction. Just so we're on the same page here, we were looking at that $65,000 sales tax, use tax higher than what we anticipated in August. We talked about between the radios and the Parks and Rec master plan, about 45,000. So as we go through these next few slides, I'm going to consider those two numbers basically a wash, just so that nothing in here is going to change right now.
All right, and as a reminder, we've got about 15 minutes left.
Really? Okay, I'll go. All right, so in the general fund, we're looking at about just over $3 million in projected beginning cash balance. We have a policy that requires that 40% of that reserve be held, or sorry, a 40% reserve be held aside. So that's about $1.5 million, and about half of that is currently in CDs. And we're in conversation with our bank to see if we should maybe invest a little bit more of that soon. That would leave a excess cash on hand amount of just under 1.3 million. And that dollar amount provides support for our cash flows, and then also is available to spend on our CIP plan or other one-time expenses. So staff's recommendation for one-time expenses included in the fiscal year 21 budget would be either the lobby or restroom improvements at City Hall, and that might be driven a little bit by what the board feels like which of those two projects might be more important. Do we do the restrooms, which are pretty close to the new council chambers, or do we focus on the other public area of City Hall and do the lobby? We're looking at a new records management software for the police department, a electrical upgrade at the campground. We would do that in 3 phases, with the next 2 phases coming each of the next 2 years. A transportation master plan, including complete streets and trails. A GIS and asset management program. That cost would be split with the combined water and wastewater systems fund. And then we are looking at engineering for a combined streets and parks building. The water master plan calls for an upgrade or an expansion of the water treatment plant in the next few years, which would basically kick streets out of where they're currently at. So we're going to look at engineering a potentially combined building for those 2 departments.
What's the year we're kicking them out?
I believe, let me look real quick. It is 2023 is when that's slated for construction. Now that is, that's also population based, so that might be pushed back a year or 2.
But Chuck, if you had to pick between that and the sewer pump out at Smith's Fork, which one would you do first?
Who are you asking?
So the question was between a park street
Yeah,
facility and the pump.
Yeah.
Well, I think the streets facility is desperately needed. But I think we should look at that pump issue too, because we were talking about that the other day, and it's a high priority. So
Think about that before we have our next work session on this.
just do both.
Sure. You find me the money. We'll talk about it. All right. Go on, Dan.
Okay, and then staff is also recommending a transfer to seed a vehicle and replacement fund. And I'll touch base on this again a little bit later, but ideally we'd like to build up a reserve of about $500,000 in that fund so that if we ever wanted to get out of that program, we would have the funding available to purchase the vehicles that we would need to give up by ending the program. So when we look at the general fund and its use of excess cash on hand, so about 1.3 million, as I stated earlier, that plan, those last 2 slides that we just talked about would utilize together about 722,000 of that money, leaving about 567,000 available. Now that's excess cash on hand. So that's over and above that 1.8 million that's sitting in the required reserve. So that's 12.5% over and above that reserve. So you take that 567,000, add back in that 1.8 million, add back in that 8,000 that revenue is over expenditures, and our ending cash balance for fiscal year 21 is projected to be 2.4 million. That would equate to about a 53.5% reserve. So we're over and above that 40%.
And Dan, just to clarify there, because that ending cash on hand, the amount of excess reserve is about 550,000, 560,000. To just make sure we know that excess over our 40%.
Correct. So when we look into the future, we actually have $530,000 on our future CIP plan in the general fund. That would be for more City Hall improvements. So the opposite project of the lobby or restrooms, the kitchen improvements, a reconfiguration over on the police side, and then a rehabilitation on the administrative side. Those next 2 rounds of electrical upgrades at the campground, the construction of the combined streets and parks building, although that's not really doesn't really have a dollar amount tied to it here, because it's going to be funded through some sort of debt issuance, whether it's a COP or whether it's another bond issuance. We assume at this point that it's going to be. And then that does include $40,000 in transfers for the next 9 years into the vehicle and equipment replacement fund. So what does that look like if we look at this is excess cash in the general fund. So not touching the 40% reserve. This is just that money that's over and above everything. So projected wise, we're looking at about $3 million at the end of fiscal year 20. We talked about eating about 722,000 of that in fiscal year 21. So that would be this 575,000 here. And then some small chunks in that future CIP plan would by fiscal year 25 take that excess cash down to pretty close to nothing. So at that point, we'd be left with, we'd still have that 1.8 million reserve. It's not touching the reserve at all, but we would be eating into our excess cash over those next 5 years.
Can I interject here and have some discussion? I really thought on this after this was presented at our financial committee meeting. Can't believe I'm going to say this, but I would support using some of that excess cash on hand to probably do some of the work on City Hall. Probably everything you listed there, plus the leased vehicle, 40,000. I would question maybe doing what was maybe needed on the police side from the standpoint if we were going to look at a sales tax, possibly in the not so distant future, possibly of maybe tabling that portion of that for a little while, but really looking at addressing, like I said, the City Hall lobby, the records management, those upgrades to Smith Fork Park, that transportation master plan, the GIS, and then that engineering.
Okay.
So
I think that would be a great idea.
So are you wanting us to look at doing all the City Hall improvements this next year and try to bundle it and save it a little bit?
By City Hall improvements, are you talking about the police department or just the city, what I would call the other side? Like the lobby, yeah, the lobby and restroom, the kitchen, and probably the admin.
Yeah, if we could combine those in one project, I think we have some savings.
Mm-hmm.
And is the direction to look at that potentially for as early as fiscal year 21?
I would. And then if we delayed the police reconfiguration, could we then maybe look at Parks and Rec or the campground electrical upgrades, doing all of those?
Okay.
I think the only thing I would remove from that is the police reconfiguration right now.
Sure.
That screen. I would look at it doing everything else.
And to clarify what I heard you say too, Melissa, is that holding off on the police configuration right now, awaiting the possibility of public safety funding.
Yes.
Okay. I didn't want Chief to get on me tomorrow.
Don't worry, Chief. We're looking in that one for you.
So I know we figured out a new way to possibly attack that one. Do we do those initial upgrades and hold that campground upgrades later in the year till we have some idea if we're going to be able to make that happen?
Here's what I'm thinking on this, and Matt, correct me if I'm wrong, Matt, but I think you could probably only do one phase at a time while we're closed. With the ground being frozen and everything else, I don't think we can shut down the whole campground because that might delay opening.
Yeah, correct. Phase 2 and 3 take a little bit more work. We met with TNT Electric, who did the upgrades a couple years ago, and they were confident they would get the first phase done with no problem. But phase 2 and 3 are going to take a little bit more work.
Okay, that's fair.
Yeah, we don't, because what I'd love to see is, as we do this Parks and Rec master plan, is us planning for additional opportunities at Smith's Fork for people to stay over, not just camping, and maybe that becomes part of the plan too. You know, adding cabins or whatnot, or expanding that space or whatever we do, because we're going to get rid of the pump station out of there. We're going to open that up a little more. So we'll see what the plan comes up with. So might have to be some reconfiguration out there anyway.
Okay, I got that. Okay, I'm going to go through a couple other funds real quick, and then we'll talk about where we want this to go into the future. So, vehicle and equipment replacement fund, I touched on it earlier. We don't have a cash balance in that fund yet. We talked about transferring $40,000 from the general fund to kind of start that seed money in the reserve. The way that this program works, in year one, we are going to, with the plan as it lays out right now would be to sell 18 currently owned vehicles by the city. And a couple of those are some newer vehicles that have some good value, but a majority of those are vehicles that are well past their replacement age, and we just need, functionally, we need to get some newer vehicles for those departments. So selling those vehicles would project to bring about $125,000 in revenue to that fund. The lease expense cost for bringing on 15 new vehicles in year one is about $125,000. So the sales proceeds from those 18 vehicles would fund the first year of lease payments for 15 new vehicles. And that would leave the $40,000 transfer as a cash balance in the vehicle and equipment replacement fund. In the capital projects fund, we have a projected beginning cash balance of about $243,000. Those are what's going to be remaining from the 2018 and 19 GEO bonds. We've completed the majority of the projects that were listed in that scope. We don't have any future revenue source in this fund, and we have to spend this money by February of 2022 anyway. So we are going to commit the cash that's remaining in that fund to the Downtown Streetscape East project. We know we want to do that project. It's on our radar for next year. We need to spend this money anyway. Let's spend it on that project. Okay, but before we get too much further, I know that I'm not going to finish the whole rest of this presentation in 5 minutes. So,
That's all right. You can go over. It's fine.
Oh, okay. All right.
Since it's your last meeting, I'll give you extra time. We'll just start.
I would have come back if we were going to push it. That's fine. All right. So transportation sales tax fund. So here's the revenue versus expenses in this fund over the past 3 years. So we do kind of ebb and flow in here a little bit with the institution of doing the asphalt overlay program every other year. So fiscal year 19 would be a year that we did the asphalt overlay. We spent more than we took in. This year, we're not doing an asphalt overlay, so we are actually gaining some revenue, or revenue exceeds expenditures. And then next year, the asphalt revenue program, or the asphalt replacement program is happening again, so we're exceeding those expenditures. This fund has a cash balance of just under $500,000. We expect to bring in about $530,000 in revenue next year. This fund does have some operating expenditures for the street department. It has the street sweeper lease in here. Some fuel, some road salt for the winter is in this fund. And then the projected 2021 CIP is $510,000. That is the asphalt overlay at Rock Creek, the asphalt overlay at Coulter Addition, some microsurfacing work, and the building or the construction of a salt shed on the north side of town. There are some asterisks next to the Coulter Addition, because right now, those streets are not deeded over to the city. They are privately owned streets. Chuck can talk a little bit about, elaborate on this a little bit, but we believe that proposing that we are going to repair those roads is a good way, is good leverage to get those streets into the city and to be able to take care of them properly.
Well, I don't think it's just the paving of them, it's the snow removal and other maintenance of them as well.
Correct.
Yeah.
And make sure we have the easements we need if we need to add sidewalks or trails or whatnot in those along those streets as well.
And then that would leave an ending cash balance in the transportation sales tax fund of $328,000. So cash balance wise, in this fund, currently we're at that 485. We're going to spend more than we take in next year, so we're going to go down to 328. Then we are going to stay steady the year after that. Then we're going to do another chunk of asphalt projects, take this down to 115. And then the intent at that point would be to stay pretty steady after that. The Parks and Stormwater Sales Tax Fund. So this will be a new fund that gets created in October at the same time you guys are doing the readings on the budget. We anticipate about $442,000 in sales tax revenue, which really begins in January of 21. So it's only about 10 months of revenue in this budget year. Operating expenditures, staff is recommending that no operating expenditures for streets or for Parks and Recreation are paid from this fund. And at this point, we want to include some money, $225,000 for CIP expenses. The board, at the time that they passed the Parks and Stormwater Sales Tax, had mentioned that they wanted to review those expenses annually and designate how much is going towards parks, how much is going towards stormwater during each budget year. So let's take a quick look over at the capital improvement plan. I'm going to share this and then I need to switch my tabs. Okay. So right now, staff's recommendation is to include $25,000 for improvements by the splash pad, which would be for fencing, benches, and shade structures. To include $100,000 for the Parks and Recreation Master Plan. Now, if we get started on that a little bit early in fiscal year 20, then that number surely won't be 100,000, or we wouldn't anticipate that it would be 100,000. That number would come down. And then budget another 100,000 for a to be determined project. And I know I called that a Parks and Recreation Master Plan project, but that also could be a stormwater project. So this capital improvement plan here has identified several projects in the Parks Department, and I believe that the master plan would probably add to this list, or at the very least maybe reorganize it in some different priorities. And then this also has some stormwater projects that were on our radar. And I know that Chuck is also doing some additional work to kind of put these and other stormwater projects in priority order. But the guidance right now would be, is our recommendation to include some money for the last bit of the Parks and Recreation Master Plan, and including some other funding for what could be a parks project or what could be a stormwater project to be chosen later. Is that okay with the board in terms of the recommended budget?
I'm okay with that.
Okay.
That looks good.
Okay, so then I will bounce back over to this fund. So if we take in 440,000, if we hold aside, or if we budget 225,000 in expenditures, we would still have a cash balance in this fund of about 217,000. And as it sits right now, the future CIP is very undetermined. That will come into a clearer picture as the master plan concludes, and then as Chuck continues to evaluate stormwater projects.
Do we need to put a number for stormwater for this year, or do we want to wait till next year? And do we need to put anything else in there? Like anything?
Can you clarify? I'm sorry.
Like, do we want to put aside and say that we're going to put 15% towards stormwater projects?
Well, and I think that what I would recommend is that as we progress through the budget, as Dan had indicated, we've got Chuck looking at stormwater projects. Parks and Recreation Master Plan will help us identify future projects for Parks and Recreation side. We're looking at the splash pad for up north. As Chuck develops a list of some stormwater priorities, kind of like he did with the road, his pavement management index, in looking at needs, we will have some needs down the road. Unfortunately, I hate to say a plan again, we're probably going to need to look at some stormwater master planning. We need through the GIS to really map and identify our stormwater system. There are some projects that need to occur. You know, Chuck and I were having the conversation, I think even as recently as today, that the Main Street Trail has a number of culvert replacements in it. That's something that, you know, as we look at trails through the expansion of the Parks and Recreation system, through the Parks and Recreation Master Plan, I think you'll see some joint expenditures there. So my recommendation for 2021 funds would be, as kind of we've presented, let's have placeholder expenditures here and we bring priorities forward for your all's review this fall, if the board's comfortable in directing that.
Sounds good. And I think every trail project's a great opportunity for stormwater management, using permeables or the plantings along the trails or culverts or whatever we do. So.
Okay, capital improvement sales tax fund. This is the half-cent capital improvement sales tax, which goes to fund primarily debt first. It funds our debt repayments. And then it also can be used for capital improvement projects. So in 19, this was the first year of the revenue. We received 451,000. We only made a transfer to debt service. In the fiscal year 20, here's the revenue projection, and we are making a transfer to debt service and also funding that reserve in the debt service. And then here is our revenue and expenditures for next year. So budget highlights here, we're starting with a small cash balance, about 35,000. Sales tax revenue of 530. We're going to spend 509, or we're recommending that we spend $509,000, which would be a transfer to debt service for the fiscal year 21 debt payments, adding a little bit to the debt service reserve. And then also we're recommending that part of the Streetscape East funding be paid from this fund as well, which would leave an ending cash balance of about $56,000 in this fund. In the future, we have a couple projects funded a couple years out, the Downtown Streetscape Gateway sign, and then the Downtown Streetscape North project. Cash balance wise, what that looks like is, here's the 34,000 that we're at right now. We're going to be at 56,000 next year. We build that balance to 245,000 the year after. And then fiscal year 23 and fiscal year 24 is where we're going to spend some of that CIP money. And then beginning in fiscal year 25, we start to build that cash balance again. The projections, sorry about that. The projections in this fund are that capital improvement sales tax revenue will exceed our debt service repayments for all 20 years, and actually will exceed it by 6 figures for the first 10 years. So this cash balance, this 313 in fiscal year 25, is going to continue to grow through about fiscal year 28. And then from 29 to 38, the projected revenue and the debt service.
Oh, no.
Well, this is part of the next meeting.
Oh, is that what it is?
In those years.
No, he's just, yeah.
In the debt service fund, so we transferred in 127,000 last year to pay the 127,000 that we needed to repay. This current year, we've transferred in 556. We only need to pay 325, so that difference is going to fund that reserve. And then next year, we're going to transfer in 342, and our debt repayments are 329,000. So that 231,000 cash balance, beginning cash balance by design, is exactly what we need to pay the next debt payment. So then we're going to transfer that money in. We're going to pay these next 2 debt payments. Our ending cash balance will be 243,000, which is exactly what we need as a reserve for that following March debt payment. Cash balance in this fund, we're just going to continue to add a little bit to that reserve every year. Combined Water and Wastewater Systems Fund. So operating revenue consistently exceeds operating expenditures. We know there are a lot of capital improvement projects, high dollar improvements in this fund. So a lot of that excess revenue, all of that excess revenue, goes towards funding many CIP projects. Operating revenue wise for fiscal year 21, we're looking at 4.4 million, which staff recommends it include a 3% increase in water sales revenue, which is about $72,000, and a 10% increase in wastewater sales revenue, which is about $150,000. Those percentage increases are based off of the year 3 rate increase recommendation from the 2018 rate study. So this would be year 3 of 5 of that study. And as we get a little bit into the future slides, we'll have a talk about whether or not we want to, or when's the appropriate time to redo that study or update that study. So just those 2 changes alone account for $226,000 of additional revenue. All of those other small line items for revenue in this fund add up to about $19,000 of increase. Operational expenditures, about 3.1 million. Very similar to the general fund. This is no cost of living adjustment. This is a 3% merit pool, which has about a $13,000 impact. We've added the on-call time compensation in this fund as well for about $23,000. We've included the same 15% increase in medical insurance premiums for $9,000. And then we have an increase in our costs for Kansas City sewer services for that Forest Oaks subdivision, about $26,000. And that $26,000, that increase is stemmed from, we started to have those conversations with Kansas City about what that Forest Oaks sewer project looks like in the next couple of years. And part of those conversations led to basically an audit of how many homes we have in that subdivision. And we found that we have more homes than we were telling Kansas City that we had. So we want to do the right thing, and we want to pay the appropriate amount for how many homes that they're servicing. So we've gone ahead and increased that dollar amount. So those 5 bullet points add up to $71,000. All the other changes in this fund is another $24,000. So it's no surprise here, operating revenue very much exceeds operating expenditures by about $1.3 million. So what does our cash balance look like in this fund? We have about $1.3 million projected at the beginning of 21. This fund has a 20% required reserve, so about $622,000 we'll pull on and hold that aside. And again, similar to the general fund, about half of that is currently in CDs. That would leave an excess cash on hand of about $698,000. CIP expenses included in the recommended 21 budget are the Highland Drive sewer replacement, which that project fixes those sewer issues on that street or behind those homes. The 188th Street water line project, that's in relation to the MoDOT work at that intersection of 188th and 169. We currently have 4th Street and 4th Terrace water and sewer line replacement. And then we also have the raw water pump station, valve box, and zebra mussel control. In this fund, we're really looking at $870,000. It's really a $1,870,000 project, but we're taking $1 million of that from water impact fees. And then it has that other portion of the GIS and asset management program from this fund. So those are our CIP and one-time expenses in this fund for fiscal year 21. So when we're looking at cash balance, let's look at impact fees first. So water impact, we have about 950,000. Sewer impact, we have about 630,000. Revenue-wise, we expect to receive about 176,000 in water impact fees, about 202,000 in sewer impact fees. There's that $1 million expenditure from the water impact fund for the raw water pump station, valve box, and zebra mussel control project, which would leave ending cash balances in those impact fees, about 128,000 in water, about 832,000 in sewer impact fees. back to the Water and Wastewater Systems Fund. If we looked at that excess cash on hand figure of just under 700,000, add in the operating revenue over operating expenditures of about 1.3 million, realize that we're using about 2 million of that on those CIP and other one-time expenses, and that really does reduce our excess cash on hand to about $7,000. So we're not touching that 20% reserve, but we really are using all of that excess cash on hand money. So when we look at ending balance, we take that $7,000 ending cash on hand, add back in the 20% reserve, leaves us with an ending cash balance of about 630,000. Future CIP here, we have River Crossing water line, Maple Lane water line, improvements to the chemical feed building, and some smaller interconnecting projects at 144th and 169 and Amory at 169. Those are all water master plan projects for just fiscal year 22, just over $1 million. And then we have other future water and master plan and wastewater master plan projects. So this next screen shows our cash balance projected at the end of 20, projected at the end of 21, projected at the end of 22, and then that really falls off. So those numbers turn red. We don't have the cash on hand to do those big water master plan and wastewater master plan projects. So that's that water plant expansion that I talked about in 23 with almost $10 million price tag on that. And then that $6.5 million price tag for the North Sewer Interceptor that we just talked about in the wastewater master plan. So both of those projects are based on population growth. So right now they're slated for fiscal year 23, but that could change depending on what our population growth is. And it's no surprise that these are huge price tags. We're going to have to fund these through debt. So cash-wise, we're not going to be able to handle it, but we will be looking at further debt issuances so that we can continue to implement those projects. We also know that, as I mentioned earlier, we're at year 3 of those rate increases of 5. So coming up is probably a good opportunity to look at an update to that rate study. Now that especially we're going to be receiving the wastewater master plan and all those projects, and really look at what our rates need to be in order to fund both of those plans. We also know that, I had another thought there, now I'm losing it. Darn it. But we know that we want to look at that rate study. Oh, we were going to look at, as part of that rate study, we want to include a look at our current rates for impact fees, those water and wastewater impact fees. Those are paid by new development, and the intent is for those revenues to fund these future expansion projects that are based on population growth. The first rate study did not look at those impact fees. So if we do, or when we do an update of that rate study, we want to look at those impact fees so that that new development is paying for those projects that is based on population growth in the future. So this is that red flag that Cynthia talked about earlier. We know we need to identify some ways to fund this. That's going to be a big project as I transition out of this position and whoever new transitions into the position. A couple other funds I think we have to talk about real quick. Sanitation fund, as I mentioned in the 9-month budget update, this fund is intended to be able to fund itself. The revenue in 19 and projected revenue in 20 are a little bit behind expenditures. I've noted in some other reports earlier in the year that we've really done a lot of digging to find out why that is. And we found some deficiencies in the way that our billing system was set up to where basically if people didn't have their accounts paid in full, the last thing that got paid was the sanitation fund. And we thought, you know what, if this is supposed to fund itself, we should probably take care of this fund right off the top. So we moved some of those priorities so that the revenue can go ahead and fund this in its entirety. So projection for fiscal year 21 would be that revenue exceeds expenditures by about $5,000. So right now we're looking at revenue of about $19.30 per customer for the first few months of the year. Then a rate increase kicks in and it'll go to $19.90 per customer. We anticipate a small amount of late fee revenue, and then we throw in a $25,000 contingency just so that if development picks up and we have an influx of residents, we have a little bit of contingency in this fund. Expenditure-wise, our contract with WCA, we have, it's $18.92 per customer right now. That's going to increase to $19.51 per customer beginning in February. So we also budget for a $12,000 cost for the household hazardous waste program, and then we budget that same contingency on the expenditure side. So this fund is not supposed to have a very big cash balance. So that $37,000 that's projected at the end of 21 is exactly where we want to be. And I believe we talked a little bit about cash balance here increasing, not by much, and that should be the end of the presentation. So I will definitely, I heard all the feedback on the general fund. I'll look at it, I'll revise it. We'll talk about it again in another work session so that you guys can see an updated version of that. Are there any other comments and any other funds that we may want to look at? I know that the mayor had mentioned the campground lift station project. So Chuck and I will get together and talk about where that falls in and see if there's any possibility to look at that as an earlier project than where it's currently listed. But are there any other comments? If not, I'll just say that in total, my 3 years in Smithville have been great, and I've really learned a lot, both professionally and personally. And I thank the board members that are here that I've been able to work with. I really feel like I've grown, and I appreciate the help and the communication and the progress that we've made. And I hope that we can continue to do that in the future.
Thank you, Dan.
Thanks, Dan.
Anyone else have any comments for Dan on the budget? All right, with that, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
I move to adjourn.
Second.
Second by Alderwoman Wilson. John forgot to hit the space bar. All those in favor of adjourning say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. I'll give you guys a 5-minute recess. We'll be back in 5 minutes. All right, enough shenanigans. We're gonna start our meeting. Linda, we good to start?
We're good.
All right. Smithville Board of Alderman meeting is now called to order. Dan, are you still on? Talakis still there? Yeah.
Yes, I'm here. Yes, I'm here.
All right, Dan, will you please lead us in the pledge, since it's your actual last meeting and the last one was just a prequel to your last meeting?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Dan. First item on the agenda is the consent agenda. A motion to approve the consent agenda. Alderman Sarver.
Motion to approve the consent agenda.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Alderman Atkins. Any discussion on the consent agenda? I'm going to have Linda call roll on this one, so we have attendance as well. So please call roll.
Alderwoman Wilson.
I abstain.
Alderman Sarver.
Aye.
Alderman Atkins.
Aye.
Alderman Blumker. Alderman Chevalier.
Blumker can't unmute, so he said aye.
Aye.
Alderman Uladell.
Aye.
5 with 1 abstain.
All right, motion carries. Committee reports. Alderwoman Wilson, Planning and Zoning. What do you have to report? And you could do Finance too if you'd like, if we have anything to report from Finance Committee.
Well, on planning and zoning, we have 26 single-family residence permits. We talked quite a bit about the comp plan through that meeting. It's important that we go forwards, that all of them, planning and zoning, get really involved with, since we're really on the downhill side of that comp plan. We discussed a lot of the commercial activity that's still going on within our community, and looks like Porter's is hoping to be open, I think, the first part of September, and I see that Price Chopper is still maybe targeted for October. And Finance Committee, we all just sat through the work session. A big portion of our Finance Committee was talking about the budget for the coming year, and that's the end of my reports.
Thank you. Next item is the City Administrator's report. I'm sure it's going to be brief. Ms. Wagner, do you have anything to report?
The majority of the items are included in your packet. I want to recognize the mayor for his appointment to the Mid-America Regional Council Board. I do provide information on an update on CARES funding in the report. There are 2 items on the agenda for later this evening based on board direction at the August 4th meeting. That's the utility grant and business grants. I did reach out to NRAD as well as the Fire Protection District with regard to foggers, and if you all continue to be okay with that, I have indicated to them so long as they could find something within my expenditure authority at $7,500, we would provide funding for foggers for them for cleaning of their facilities. Improvements at Heritage Park for live streaming are currently underway. The meeting room equipment, some has been delivered. We received our 2 televisions. The remainder of the equipment for the audio visual upgrades in here is anticipated over the next few weeks. Install is scheduled for the week of September 14th, again, assuming all of the materials arrive on time. The materials for the touchless amenities, water fountains, and faucets are on order, and we'll keep you advised as to the situation there. One of the items that is included in the staff report outlines some additional review and discussion related to a potential exposure. If we have any employees that have to utilize additional Families First coronavirus relief funds, the equivalent of the FMLA, the 80 hours provided through the CARES Act, it has been indicated in review by our attorneys that that is an eligible CARES expenditure, and we could look to reimbursement there. Each employee is entitled to up to 2 weeks leave. A 2-week payroll for us is about $80,000. So I would recommend that we kind of hold that in case we have any need through that. So to date, we've spent or have committed or kind of identified as set aside about $625,000. About $320,000 remains of the funding. The unknowns at this point continue to be HVAC, as indicated in the staff report, and based on Alderman Blomker's recommendation at our last meeting, we will have a bid basically shovel ready for that in case we do want to proceed with that at some point. I did include information from the school district with regard to assistance that they may require. And then my recommendation then would be also to leave a portion unallocated at this point in time. We don't know what may happen as we continue through COVID and potential response to that. I do outline information for our fall recreation programs. While numbers are down somewhat, we have good participation levels. And Brittany Probst, our new recreation coordinator, has done a tremendous job identifying new programs and working to make those happen. Our summer programming has had to really shift some of our thought processes, but she's done a great job with that as well. So we're very pleased with that. Bit of an update on the comp plan. All the information on the portal is updated. It does include some homework and discussion from past meetings. You'll notice our Facebook and social media kind of directs people to the portal in each of the focus group areas, and we highly encourage people to engage in that. There's some lively discussion there, or good feedback. Yesterday, I sent an email to members of the board. The EDC and the Planning Commission also received surveys with regard to industrial development. So request your input on that. The next scheduled meetings are August 31st, September 1st, 2nd, and 3rd. Those will all be via Zoom. We did find that a hybrid was kind of difficult to incorporate the folks who were on site in the discussion. Those will be from 4 to 6 p.m. in a Zoom format, and people can register for those through the portal. I have received word, not included in the packet information, that a letter should be forthcoming within the next few days to week or so from downtown with the Corps of Engineers for approval of the dog park. I've been in contact with staff at the county, and they know that we stand at the ready to assist with the utility line installation once we have those approvals in place. So they will reach out to us and we'll move forward from there, and I will let you know a status as soon as we have that information. One final item, I do want to remind the board that per discussion at the July 7th meeting and resolution on the 17th, the shutoffs for water and sewer utilities were suspended through July 31st. So with the current billing, the July bill that arrives in people's mailboxes for August, the due date was August 16th. Shutoffs will begin the 27th. At this point in time, we do have 827 past due accounts. That's compared to 712-ish last month. So there are some increases there. We do, as I had indicated earlier, have the CARES grant for utility assistance included later in the agenda. With that, I would stand for any questions.
Yeah, how does the delinquent accounts compare to this time last year? Just as a, do you know?
Dan, I don't know if we have the comparison of this time last year, and I should have thought about that. I'm sorry.
I have it right in front of me. We do track that, so I can, I'll either VPN in after the meeting to our shared drive, or I will look at it tomorrow and we can send an email out to the board. Does that work?
Okay.
Sounds good, thank you.
I'd like to touch briefly on the CARES funding. This board has heard me on my soapbox related to the time bounding of the CARES Act funds for the city. We're clearly not on the other side of this, and I want to ensure that we maintain a proper reserve and address those unknown unknowns that are clearly coming our way. I also want to acknowledge that every public board is struggling right now with governing in the age of COVID, and I want to thank the school board in particular for the hard work that they're doing and undertaking, and thank them for their service. I did note in their request, though, that a number of those initiatives don't quite fall into the category that I would expected to kind of see from them with their request for funding. I'd be supportive of funding the band request under the City Administrative Spending Authority, and I'd like to see a little bit more detail on the PPE request. Knowing the importance of one-on-one in the elementary that's been so public and so clear, I'd love to see this board consider funding sneeze guard, plexiglass arrangements for those elementary teachers to allow them to have that barrier for that critical one-on-one education at their desk and or their small group tables as they kind of proceed with their one-on-one or in-person to start the year.
I can definitely follow up and get information back to the board with those numbers. Mayor, that concludes my report unless there's additional discussion.
All right, moving on to agenda item number 6. Alderman Sarver.
Motion to approve bill number 2866.20, readopt the Code of Ethics, second reading.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion? Clerk, please call roll.
Alderman Chevalier,
Aye.
Alderman Uladell,
Aye.
Alderman Blumker,
Aye.
Alderwoman Wilson,
Aye.
Alderman Atkins,
Aye.
Alderman Sarver.
Aye.
6-0.
Motion carries. Ms. Wagner, please read the bill.
An ordinance amending Chapter 135 of the Code of Ordinances.
Thank you. Moving on to number 7.
I move to approve bill number 2867-20, repeal section 385.030, helmet law, first reading.
Thank you. And I saw Alderman Sarver had his hand up.
Oh,
You're on mute, Steve.
What's that?
Do you want the second?
I'll take the second.
Okay. Any discussion? Clerk, please call roll.
Alderman Uladell,
Aye.
Alderman Chevalier,
No.
Alderman Blumker,
Aye.
Alderman Sarver,
Aye.
Alderwoman Wilson,
aye.
Alderman Atkins,
Aye.
5-1.
Motion carries. Ms. Wagner, please read the bill.
An ordinance repealing ordinance section 385.030, operation of motor vehicle without proper license prohibited, motorcycle special license, and enacting in its place a new ordinance section 385.030, operation of motor vehicle without proper license prohibited, motorcycle special license.
Thank you. Next item on the agenda is number 8. Alderman Sarver.
Motion to approve bill number 2868-20, rezoning Harbor Lake replat lot 2, first reading.
Thank you. Alderman Chevalier.
Second that.
The applicant is here if anyone has any questions. Hearing none. Any discussion? Clerk, please call roll.
Alderman Blumker,
Aye.
Alderman Uladell,
Aye.
Alderman Chevalier,
Aye.
Alderwoman Wilson,
Aye.
Alderman Atkins,
Aye.
Alderman Sarver,
Aye.
6-0.
Motion carries. Ms. Wagner, please read the bill.
An ordinance changing the zoning classifications or districts of certain lands located in the city of Smithville, Missouri.
Thank you. Next item on the agenda is number 9. Alderman Bunker.
Mr. Mayor, I move to approve bill number 2869-20, condemnation of certain lands for the first reading.
Thank you. Alderman Chevalier, I saw your hand next.
I will second that.
Thank you. Any discussion?
I just want to note, I know this is not the direction that any board wants to take, but hopefully this is a step in the process to moving that process forward and getting to where we need to get.
Thank you. Any other discussion? Clerk, please call roll.
Alderman Sarver,
Aye.
Alderwoman Wilson,
Aye.
Alderman Uladell,
Aye.
Alderman Chevalier,
Aye.
Alderman Atkins,
Aye.
Alderman Blumker,
Aye.
6-0.
Motion carries. Ms. Wagner, please read the bill.
An ordinance authorizing condemnation of certain lands for the purpose of constructing and maintaining a sewer line.
Thank you. Now for the lightning round. Next item is number 10. Alderman Chevalier.
Thank you. I move to approve resolution 813 to award bid number 20-13 for city tow services.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
Second.
Alderman Atkins seconds. Any discussion? All those in favor of approving resolution 813 say aye.
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 All opposed say no. Motion carries. Next item on the agenda is number 11, resolution 814. Alderman Sarver.
Motion to approve resolution 814, award bid number 20-14 to rebuild the transfer and high service pumps at the wastewater plant.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor of approving resolution 814 say aye.
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 All opposed say no. Motion carries. Next item on the agenda is resolution 815, number 12 on the agenda.
Mr. Mayor, I move to approve resolution 815, part-time employment agreement.
Thank you. Do I have a second? Alderman
Second.
Chevalier. Second by Alderman Chevalier. Any discussion? I'd just like to thank Dan for agreeing to work with us while he's leaving us. Appreciate that. All those in favor of approving resolution 815 say aye.
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 All opposed say no. Motion carries. Next item is number 13, resolution 816. Alderman Chevalier.
Thank you. I move to approve resolution 816, amendment to the fiscal year 19 to 20 compensation plan.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
Second.
Sorry, Alderman Sarver, I didn't see your hand. Alderwoman Wilson has a second. All those in favor of approving, any discussion? Steve probably wants to discuss my lack of calling on him. Get you on the next one. All right, all those in favor of approving resolution 816 say aye.
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 All opposed say no.
Mayor, I would note that we will begin advertisement for that position with this update to the job description tomorrow morning.
Sounds good. Motion carries. Next item on the agenda is resolution 817. Alderman Sarver.
Motion to approve resolution 817, site plan Shamrock Convenience Store.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
Second.
Alderman Atkins has a second. Any discussion? All right, ready for some more commercial construction. All those in favor of approving resolution 817, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say no. Motion carries. Next item on the agenda is resolution 818, and 819 is also part of the CARES funding. So we'll do 818 first, 15A. Alderman Chevalier.
Thank you. Move to approve resolution 18A, MOU with Clay County Economic Development.
Thank you. Do I have a second on resolution 818?
Second.
Thank you, Alderman Blumker. Any discussion? All those in favor of approving resolution 818, say aye.
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 Opposed, say no. Motion carries. Next item on the agenda is 15B, resolution 819. Alderman Chevalier.
Thank you. Move to approve resolution 819, MOU with Northland Assistance Center.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Alderman Atkins. Any discussion? All right, all those in favor of approving resolution 819, say aye.
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 All opposed, say no. Motion carries. Next is number 16, resolution 820. Alderman Sarver.
Motion to approve resolution 820, authorize purchase of road salt.
Thank you. Do I have a second? Alderman Uladell.
Second.
You, any discussion? I personally want to thank you for this one because, you know, we're going to use it, hope maybe, possibly. So let's buy it in advance, whatever. Thanks, Chuck. I know you're prepared for the winter in your log cabin there. All those in favor of approving resolution 820, say aye.
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 Opposed, say no. Motion carries. Do we have any public comment tonight? No public comment. Okay. Any new business? All right, with that, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Mr. Mayor, I move to adjourn.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Alderman Chevalier. All those in favor of adjourning, say aye.
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 All opposed, say no. Stand adjourned.